So as Election Day approaches and many states making a long slog toward it, we're mostly focused on what happens the day of Tuesday, November 3rd.
But at least one person is looking at the 70-something days between the election and the inauguration. Executive editor of the American Prospect, Dayen. He's written about a time period that he believes will be what he calls the most harrowing in American history. And David joins us now to tell us why he thinks that's the case. It's good to see you, David. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So, David, lay out your case. We've covered a little bit about some of the projections about election night versus mail-in ballots, but I think you would take it a little bit further. Tell us exactly what the worst-case scenario is and maybe what the most likely scenario is.
Well, there are a bunch of scenarios. I mean, that's kind of why I wrote this piece, is that we could see sort of the worst examples of all the elections and transitions that have happened throughout American history all at once. You have the economic disaster of the 1932 transition between Hoover and Roosevelt, where the sitting president would not help in the months after the election, would not help the new president with any additional measures. You could have the disputed result of the 1876 election, where Rutherford Hayes and Sam Tilden were in a battle that lasted until 2 days before the inauguration. That's when we found out who the president was going to be. And of course, that was a sort of corrupt bargain that led to federal troops being removed from the South during Reconstruction. You could have the real sort of tribal fallout that we had after the 1860 election, where 7 states seceded from the Union. The one organization that did simulations on this election, most of them ended in opposing street battles between partisans on each side. And of course, we didn't have an election at any point during the Spanish flu epidemic, at least not a presidential election, but we still have a pandemic going on, and having a lack of leadership and a contested election in the middle of that moment is going to be a recipe for disaster as well. So there's just so many things coming together that I fear that we're going to see a lot of real problems after election.
Yeah.
Spell out some of your concerns around just the legitimacy of the results, and not just the actual legitimacy, but the acceptance of those results by partisans on both sides, and what some of the risk factors are there.
Right. I mean, there really is a problem here. In several battleground states, you're not allowed to open the ballots until the absentee ballots coming in, which are coming in at record numbers, until after the election day ends. So we're just not going to have a count on election night that reliably gives you every state's result. And the longer that process takes, and we've seen in cities like New York City, it took up to 4 to 6 weeks before all the votes were counted. If you have a process like that in the presidential election, with the fever pitch that we are already seeing around it, and the sort of pre-delegitimization that we're seeing from President Trump about if the vote margin shifts after election night, then it's sort of de facto illegitimate. Then you know, the longer and closer that whole process is, the more opportunities for president or whoever to say that this isn't a legitimate vote.
Yeah, I think this whole situation is kind of interesting, David. And I haven't really seen a way, the states are not really compensating or even really addressing this. Like, for example, in India, I know the election takes an entire month and they don't actually reveal the results until everybody has voted. And so are precincts going to be reporting in live? Like, what is the way that they're going to be handling this? I thought one way, which was pretty good, was I think it's during the Kentucky primary, whenever we had a set deadline for when the vote by mail stuff was all going to come in, like 1 week later, and everybody just kind of accepted that. Has any state really said they're going to take any actions in order to make sure that happens?
Not that I know of. Yeah. And, you know, typically how we do it is on a rolling basis. And, you know, the media is set up for this big crescendo on election night. They start tallying the votes, running them in. They have a big board behind, and they have the numbers flashing, and they're ready to report a result. And there's not going to be a result to report. And, we can't think of this as an election day. It's an election week or an election 2 weeks or whatever. And I think the ideas that you come up with would be good to lay out from the outset, but that is not the way that I know of that any state is progressing. And what we've seen, in previous elections, like in California, is you get a blue shift. Late absentees have moved Democratic, especially in this election where more Democrats and Republicans have said they're going to use absentee balloting or mail-in voting. You could see that blue shift. And in 2018, we heard grumbling from Republicans about how these elections we were winning, and then we more ballots came in and we lost. The president in the Florida election, which didn't end up shifting, said, as it started to move in the Democrats' direction, said that the election night vote should be counted and no others. And these were elections that Donald Trump wasn't personally on the ballot for, right? I mean, he had slightly less of an investment that he would if he's on the ballot. So yeah, I mean this is the fear, and then you can spin out from that. If the legitimacy of the election is called into question, you can spin out a whole bunch of scenarios, including state legislatures changing the nature of the election and sending in their own slates of electors, competing slates of electors between the Secretary of State and a legislature, and so on. This is really chaotic.
Well, and David, that gets a little bit to, okay, so we've thought a little bit about, okay, if Trump looks like he's up on election night because the in-person voting is more strongly Republican and the mail-in ballots come and it looks like a Democratic shift, I think it's highly likely that President Trump has already sowed a lot of doubt about mail-in balloting, continues to do so, which can lead to some chaotic and frightening results. What about the Democratic side? Because last time around, you do have a dynamic where, regardless of what happens, Trump could win the Electoral College. Very unlikely to win the popular vote. That was the cause of a lot of tension and angst last time around, not to mention, the Russia, the reality of Russian interference, plus the conspiracy theories around Russian interference led to a lot of conversation last time about faithless electors and all of that as well. So if Democrats actually lost to Donald Trump again, how do you think that they're likely to react?
Oh, I think it's going to be a little bit different than it was in the Hillary Clinton election. The last two times that Democrats won the popular vote but lost in the Electoral College, the various presidents and top officials, or presidential candidates and top officials, accepted the legitimacy of that result. The reason Bush v. Gore became something that was determinative is because Al Gore accepted it. This time, for example, that tabletop simulation, you had there was one scenario that was similar to what you were talking about right there, where the Democrats lose the Electoral College but win the election. And the Democrats said, we're not going to accept, in the simulation, said, we're not going to accept the legitimacy of that result. And the person who was running that was John Podesta. And John Podesta was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager or campaign chair last time around. So obviously there is a different set of thinking here, that the idea is it's not just going to be accepted this time.
Yeah. I think it's a pretty terrifying scenario, honestly.
Incredibly nerve-wracking. People should read the piece. I think you lay it out in a very sort of rational and fact-based, and you don't divulge, you don't go into all the crazy conspiracy theories that you could certainly engage in. So people should read through the piece, think about what this all might look like. David Dayen, thank you so much.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
And we'll have more Rising for you after this.